Gratis if I heck. Lovely. We're now recorded, so don't pick your noses. Kerrigan, grad assistant. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. Student rights and responsibilities. Kelly, thank you. And prevention services. Great. Lovely. My goal as a facilitator of a webinar is not to like, this is exactly how to do it, but more so, let's offer some tools, some frameworks, and how can we put those tools and frameworks in the locus of control or locus of impact that you all are making in your respective roles. So as I said, if questions or things are coming up, would love to have that dialogue as we go along. But as was mentioned in my bio, I currently serve as a lecturer at Metropolitan State University of Denver. We are a institution, Hispanic serving institution, primarily. We have a lot of adult learners as well, so we're a little bit more of a non-traditional campus. We do have traditional age student populations, but my role there is serving we have a series of 3 courses that students can take, and they're kind of embedded in a bunch of different programs that allow them to be eligible to sit for the board certifying exam to become certified health and wellness coaches for the NBHWC alphabet soup. We love that in higher ed. One of the main core tenets that I try to get across in the coaching classes that we have is the importance of behavior change and understanding and meeting people where they're at. And so motivational interviewing is one of the core tenets of that. And they'll kind of go over, we could do a webinar almost every day, probably for the next couple of years, on the depth and complexity of MI. My goal and intention is not to get everything, but to try to highlight some of the big things that we can use, and not only from a theoretical perspective, but also in a practical perspective, like put some things to use. There's a couple of resources that I'll be sharing my screen and we'll go over as a group. And about hopefully I can share those to you. So for those who are signed up and or here virtually can have those as well. That'll be like practical things that you can use, hopefully, for all those things you just shared in the chat and the roles that you're doing. So that's a quick bio about me. Prior to my time at MSU, I was in higher ed for about 10 plus years, serving like peer education / peer coaching type programs where this was a core element. I have obviously do the faculty thing here at MSU. But I also have sort of jumped a little bit and work in the behavioral health and tech space as well, doing educational programming and things of that nature. That's enough about me. Let's jump into today. So let me share my screen and make sure we can all see the information. If I can get a visual confirmation. Annabelle's shaking head. Yes, awesome. So this is the lovely title we came up with, but at the core of it, again, is giving strategies around MI that you can use hopefully in your day-to-day. Some of the things I hope to outline specifically are the sort of stages of change model. I'm sure some of you are already familiar with it, but specific keywords to pick into. So like, it's one thing to know in theory, but then like, how do we, when we're working with our students or with our peer groups, being able to pick up on that language to maybe identify from our own, roles, and or I think it's sometimes also interesting to share the model with students, be like, when it relates to X thing in your life, where do you feel like you're at in this change process? And kind of not just be, we don't need to be Oz behind the curtain. We can be sort of transparent about it. But the stages of change, review those, the words, the phrases to look out for, key characteristics of those, highlight the sort of 4 key processes of MI, and then the practical, like that's theory, some practice, but more practical stuff at the end. What are strategies at each stage that we can employ? So once we're working with a student who's working on their intake of alcohol, how do we potentially work with them in a way to elicit the most sustainable behavior change for them in relation to that particular goal? So what are strategies at each of those stages, as well as what are particular questions? And I have brainstormed and I've done some version or iteration of this presentation with a lot of groups and have consolidated some questions that other coaches and other MI professionals have come up with, and I would love to add if there's ones that you either use or ones that you think are important. But we'll review and give you sort of a handout specifically about questions you can ask at each of those stages of change. So that's our goal and game plan for today. So jumping in to stages of change, first and foremost, change is hard. Whether you're talking about trying to decrease your screen time, which I have a blurred to put my camera or my phone here, or whether or not you're doing something related to alcohol or drugs, we know that change is hard. And that just saying, you need to change or do the thing, that's not always the most effective approach. And it really brings me back to I've done some work with um, I've taken some Coursera courses, like people have heard of like the popular like Science of Wellbeing, the one that's done out of Yale. And there's the sort of GI Joe fallacy that I love that they've named in that, where it's like knowing something and doing something are different. So the GI Joe fallacy is like GI Joe, which I did not watch because I think it was a little bit before my time as a cartoon. But at the end of everything is like, and now you know, and knowing is half the battle. Um, and I don't think that's necessarily true. Knowing something and doing something are very different. And we often know what's maybe best or good for us, but it doesn't mean that we're able to implement it in our lives, which is why techniques and strategies like MI and other disciplines have emerged to help us move through the difficult change process. I always give the example, it might seem silly, but like I know stretching is good for me, but do I always do a pre and post stretch before and after physical activity? Not really. So even though I know that is good for me, it's beneficial for me, it's probably going to help me in the long run, doesn't mean that I'll do it. And I think the same can be said um, depending on stages of change or the stage that people are in as it pertains to other sort of health and wellness topics, especially in primary prevention and harm reduction. I think a lot of people know that alcohol and other drugs, while it may provide them some benefit in totality, may not be the uh, the particular instance of the particular decision that is going to maintain their long-term well-being. But knowing that and actually changing it are different, especially if you're talking about addiction and recovery and things of that nature. So change is hard. I think we all know that. We probably can all come up with an example. Feel free if you have any that you want to drop in the chat of an example of something you maybe know but don't actually do and why change and the change process is so hard. Always like to hear people's examples, but no pressure at all. But if you want to drop that in the chat, feel free to. So, stages of change model or the trans-theoretical model, used interchangeably, is sort of this process of moving through pre-contemplation to contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and relapse. This is not a linear process. It's often depicted in sort of this circular cycle or cyclical nature. And what we're going to do is talk again about like specific behaviors or indicators of each stage of change. So if you think about the peers or the people that you're working with, students that you're working with, or even faculty and staff, depending on your role, where they might be in these stages of change, particular keywords to look out for. But we'll dive into each of these. And again, at the end of this, we'll talk about not only being able to articulate what these stages are, but also have strategies and questions at each of them. So, the first stage is pre-contemplation, and this is sort of the lack of awareness that maybe a change is even needed. So the words that we're often thinking about here are I won't or I can't. So you hear a lot of that type of language when you're working with someone who's at these very early stages of change, pre-contemplative stages of change. And the those are like they're not exactly always used, but like those are pretty broad overarching concepts to look out for. Like, I won't do this, or I really can't. I'm not ready to make this change. That's an indicator that they're pre-contemplation. Contemplation is more I may. Preparation is I will. Action is I am. Maintenance is I still am. And relapse is I'm not or I'm not tempted. So again, we're going to jump into a little bit of each of these in more detail, but I like to at least highlight those at the beginning of you can see how we move through this change process from this I can't and I won't all the way to, I'm still doing this behavior, the change that I want in my life, and I'm not even tempted or I'm not engaging with um, the behavior that I was trying to change in the past. I'm not even tempted. It's part of my routine again. So pre-contemplation, this is when we're working with people in this category. They hear messages that communicate an understanding of their stage of readiness and appreciation of their full autonomy and control over their choices. It's important that people in pre-contemplation do not feel judged or inadequate. Coaches, peer educators, etc., should validate with sincerity the good reasons for the potentially unhealthy behaviors, the needs these behaviors meet, and how they help clients cope with the demands of their lives. Um, Similarly, there's the sort of I can't that's shown up here, things that are not possible. What we want to help people at this stage is to help look at barriers in a positive and possibility minded way so that they can learn from them rather than being overwhelmed by how much and how hard change actually is and all the negative emotions and maybe low confidence that is generated when we feel those barriers or potentially think about past failures or large roadblocks. Overall, and we'll talk about this and have a nice summary document for you all, but overall at this stage, it's all about providing empathy and unconditional acceptance. So what I have here on the screen is a snippet of the textbook that I actually use for our coaches that sort of highlights what this stage might look like and how we could potentially meet the individuals with that empathy and with that unconditional acceptance. So in these case studies, we'll have a couple of them, I think, throughout. There's Coach Carl, we love our alliteration, and Wendy Well. Coach Carl being the coach, Wendy Well being the client or the individual that's being coached or being worked with. So in this instance, Coach Carl says, "Hi, Wendy. My name is Coach Carl. I'm calling on behalf of your employer from Incredible Insurance Company. When you completed a health assessment last month, we noticed that you indicated you are smoking several packs of cigarettes each day. I wonder if we could talk about ways to support you in stopping smoking." Wendy Well. "Oh, yes, I figured that someone would call me. Smokers are like second-class citizens these days. I suppose you're calling me to tell me I need to stop smoking or I'll lose my insurance or get a penalty." Coach Carl, "It sounds like it's been unpleasant and frustrating for you to feel as though you're being treated like a second-class citizen because you smoke." So again, reflection and nice empathy. Wendy, well, yes, it sure is. I feel like I have to hide and be embarrassed about it. I hate the critical looks I get. I can imagine that you wish people would be more accepting of your need and desire to smoke. Wendy, well, exactly. I wish they would just leave me alone and let me smoke in peace. It's the only thing that keeps my sane life, keeps me sane in this crazy life. I don't know how I would cope without smoking. Coach Carl, I can understand how smoking is helping you cope with a lot of stress. Smokers are the only people left who take 5-minute breaks and breathe deeply, said with a smile. I'm hearing that you aren't ready right now to talk about strategies to reduce or quit smoking. Wendy, yes, you've got it. I wish others would get it. Maybe someday I'll think about quitting smoking, but not now. So this is an indication of someone who is not necessarily ready. They still sort of the scales of the pros to cons of changing this behavior is outweighed. The pros are outweighed, or I guess the cons, sorry, are outweighed by the pros. The stress relief is something that they really need in this crazy life. And so it's meeting a need for them to take a break and to find some relief. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's maybe the best way or the healthiest way to cope with stress, but it is meeting this person where they are and planting the seed for future change conversations. Contemplation is the I may. This is where that scale starts to even out a little bit more. At this stage, clients are starting to, as it The stage aptly named contemplate or think about changing unhealthy behaviors or adopting the new healthy behaviors and are considering taking action. From a textbook perspective, they say within the next 6 months. That's kind of the classification for this stage. Movement to the next stage is that they are more aware of the benefits inherent in changing and are less satisfied with their present health and well-being than those who were in the pre-contemplation stage around a specific behavior, but still feel a sense of doubt and will delay the change. This stage can last quite a while, as you may even know from working with individuals or in your own life. The term that I often use at this stage is that we sometimes have chronic contemplators. And that's because ambivalence is true. There are pros and cons to any sort of decision. As we used in that past examples, there are some pros to using tobacco products, smoking, or smoking that allows them to feel more calm, more relaxed. Again, keeps them sane, to use their language. Whereas we know there's also a lot of cons to it from a health perspective, et cetera, et cetera. But this ambivalence, this going back and forth, weighing the pros and cons, can really take a long time and can be really hard to finally tip the scale in favor of change. People in this stage are weighing the benefits of change against the effort it will take, and the balance is pretty even between the reasons to change and the reasons to stay the same. So if you're talking to someone, and again, the pre-contemplation, keeping the unhealthy behavior, the scales are tipped pretty heavy in one direction. Contemplation gets it a little bit more to the even place. And that's sort of a good indicator, or people saying like, I'm actually starting to think about doing this change. I may engage with this change. Preparation is the I will. So this is when maybe the scales are starting to tip in the direction of change. The preparation stage, known as the I will stage, these ambivalent feelings that we have largely been overcome. It doesn't mean that they're not going to come back. Again, it's not a linear process. It's sort of this cyclical, where we can go back and forth between each stage. Clients have strengthened their motivation and are planning to take some action within the next month. These clients have one or more strong motivators. They know what their barriers are, and they've come up with possible solutions that provide some hope for success. If in these tasks, developing strategies to navigate barriers are not accomplished, the clients will likely remain in the contemplation stage. One key strategy here is to experiment and sort of try out in the coaching discipline. And what I kind of teach our students and trainees of our program is we call them weekly experiments. Is go out there and to experiment with possible solutions and see how they go and to use them as sort of a learning experience. What worked, what didn't work, what could we change for the future? At this stage, it's really easy to maybe start jumping in with all of our health education or, higher ed knowledge and to sort of try to tell. But we want to really resist that writing reflex, which is what it's called in motivational interviewing, is the desire to right the wrong and not to just jump in and kind of beat over the head or like put the hammer on the head of telling you like, well, yeah, this is why you should change. Because it can really easily put people back on the defensive and back into earlier stages of change. So it's whether guard might feel like it's going down a little bit, it's important to not quote unquote like take advantage of that and really still meet them with empathy and where they are. Action is the I am. So preparing, this might be, and to use like an example from the last one, preparation, the common one that's used in like the health and wellness spheres, like for physical activity, the preparation is like maybe you're buying that gym membership or you're preparing a gym bag that you can put in your car or in your office as a primer to think about engaging in the behavior. These are all the things, the antecedents to the actual behavior itself, which is the action step. This is the active process of doing the change you want. So it's going to the gym, it's quitting smoking, it's cutting back on your alcohol, it's going sober, whatever it may be. But the momentum has started. I always say that we want Uncle Mo on our side momentum because it's sort of a snowball effect where it continues to go upon itself. In this stage, not only is the individual behavior happening, but hopefully there's new relationships, new behaviors, and new habits that are forming. So it's this idea of not only individual, but environment and context that is supportive of the behavior that they want. Relapse or movement back to a previous stage, though, is high. It's good to know that, especially as we're talking about issues related to AOD. And what we want to do is process learnings along the way. So as we're doing those weekly experiments, as we're engaging in the action, it's for us as the supports staff, the peer educators, the whatever it may be, it's important for us to say like, last week we talked about XYZ. How did it go? What went well? What were some of the barriers? What were some of the things that maybe we could think about that could allow you to be more successful or even more successful next time? So using that type of language and processing the learnings along the way is a critical component of this stage and of this process. And the maintenance is I still am. So this is when the new behavior becomes a habit, is almost done automatically. This does not mean that you do not need to diligently work at it. There still are some pitfalls at this stage, such as boredom, gradual, just sort of slipping back, or like minor or small relapses. I know in my time working with students, in particular with students who had their relationship with alcohol and other drugs was maybe strained. This time right now, when we're approaching the end of the semester or finals, when stress is high, or there's this like we're on the edge of being out of and like the light is at the end of the tunnel type stuff. It can be a little bit of a trigger, and there might be a small relapse where we go backwards to our old behaviors, and we have to really reset our goals and refocus, and make sure that the new healthy behavior that they're wanting becomes more of the focal point. But it's really easy to slip back into those previous cycles of change. And then relapse is a natural part of any of this process. So this is the other visual I often use. The other one's a little more pretty, but this is a little bit more scientific, or at least like more indicative of what the process is like. So as we talked about, we go from pre-contemplation, contemplation, all the way to maintenance. But as you see, there's the arrows going back and forth. So just because we've gone from one pizza slice to the next, we've gone from contemplation to preparation, doesn't mean that we're automatically predisposed to then be moving straight into action. We might go back from the preparation stage back into going to be that chronic contemplator. That balance and tip of scale is going back and forth for me. So relapse is a part of this process. But one thing to know at this stage is that when we move through sort of the maintenance phase, it's the idea that I'm not going to, or I'm not tempted, is sort of again is becoming more of a habit for yourself. But relapse is a part of the process that I want to make sure to share. Before I move on, I know for some of you that's probably a recap. For some others, maybe some new information. But any questions or concerns before I move forward to talking about the processes of motivational interviewing and what makes it a specific and unique skill set? Counting to 10 in my head means enough silence, I believe. If there are things, feel free to chat. I know it's harder to chat them in. If you're typing away, I'm happy to go back. But if I'm not seeing anything, I will move forward with the sort of four processes of motivational interviewing. With any sort of helping relationship or strategies that we may have in our roles, I think they're the first, or the ones that are not bolded here are the ones that I think are, indicative of a good and supportive environment. But what makes motivational interviewing and strategies of the like very interesting and unique is the evoking. So, but I'll go through the first three. Like in any sort of relationship we have, there's some sort of alliance that is built. We're working together, whether it is organic, like, I want to work with um, my peer educator or my RA or whoever it is on campus, like I just naturally want to work with them, or maybe if it's a more forced relationship or even a mandated relationship, especially when we talk about harm reduction, primary prevention, AOD type work. I've had a lot of students who have been mandated to come to me in a coaching program, and that's sort of a different relationship. But the first is like we need to engage with one another. We need to develop that we're going to have this relationship together, and we're going to have an alliance. We're working towards something. Once we have the relationship, there's sort of a focus. Why are we here? We develop a specific direction for what the goal is, what the direction is, what the potential new behavior is. So we focus together after we have the relationship. And then once we know what we want to work on, we often then just jump straight to the idea of planning. Okay, so how do we get from point A to point B? Boom, let's do that. That's sort of the natural flow and process that I often hear. But I think what's different and unique about motivational interviewing is the idea of evoking. And I have to sort of make this gesture when we talk about evoking, and it's eliciting and pulling from within the client's own motivations for change. That's what's unique about this, and I think why it's been shown to be so successful. It obviously got motivational interviewing got its start in the AOD world, but its applications have been um, broadly applied to other disciplines. In fact, it's kind of nice to come back and talk to people who might be in this space where the field originated, because a lot of times I'm giving these presentations to other support staff members of colleges and universities, or doing things at my own local university, talking about how this skill set can be broadly applied, not just in like traditional helping or clinical settings. Again, the RAs, the academic advisors, anytime there is a working alliance or you're working with someone to facilitate change for someone, this can be helpful. But evoking is, again, eliciting clients' own motivations for change. So for the first part, again, engaging, we talked about like, are we going to work together? Let's create this working alliance. Some key characteristics and things that I want to highlight here. First and foremost is that motivation interviewing states that within each person and for most, if not all, change that we have, there's again going to be these pros and cons. The scientific or motivational interviewing terms for this is that there is change talk and sustain talk. Both reside within the client. And we want to make sure that we give voice and space to both, because what we often do is we only take up one side of the equation. We say, yes, as a health educator, as someone who cares for you, as someone who's a whatever on my campus who's trying to support your growth and development, I'm just going to say like, yeah, let's force the change. And what I always talk about is like, if there's reasons for change and there's reasons against, and as helpers or as people in the field, if we only take up one side of the equation, the change talk, what does that leave the other person with? It leaves them with the sustain talk, all the reasons not to change. So in trying to help, sometimes like this writing reflex, we create an unneeded tension, or we get stuck because we're taking up one side when the only side that the other person has is to say like, yeah, but there's all these other reasons that I don't want to change. So they're left with the sustain talk. And what we want to do is give voice to both, but then elicit from them the reasons to change so that scale tips in favor of the new behavior. So the engaging is working with people, coming up with that working alliance. It's also from the motivational interviewing literature talked about is like, how do you roll with the resistance? So it's this idea that there might be some of the resistance there, and instead of fighting it, is actually rolling with it, which is why I kind of have the Tai Chi here. Is like using that energy in a way that we can make it beneficial and work with it. It's not to just shut it down because there are real and valid reasons, as we saw in that quick case study with Wendy Well for their smoking. So it's rolling with the resistance. Motivation interviewing again holds that a client's resistance talk says more about the approach of the coach than it does about the client's readiness to change. One way to show support for client autonomy is to roll with resistance. The fact is, clients do not resist change; they resist being changed. That's a constant quote that I have to remind myself when I'm working with people is that a lot of people don't resist change, they just resist being changed. Because a core fundamental belief, if you go back to lots of other theories about like human behavior, autonomy is a core element of many of them. The belief that they can have autonomy and choice over their own lives. So when we are taking that away from people, there's this innate desire to fight it. So they do not resist changing in and of itself, they resist being changed, which I think is key. So here we want to avoid moralistic judgments and any diagnostic labels, enemy images, guilt trips, making demands, things of that nature. The second principle of MI is to enable a focused exploration of the discrepancy between a client's stated values and goals and their current behaviors. So again, eliciting from them, where do they want to be? What is the best version of themselves that they want related to this topic? And what is the potential discrepancy between where they are now and where they want to be? This principle is narrower than the focus of a typical sort of maybe coaching type relationship in which a coach and a client collaborate to determine the focus and agenda for the session. Rather, this principle is more about narrowly directing the focus on the gap between the client's present situation and their valued stated goals. This can be appropriate if offered to those that you're first working with as one of several options, and they are then able to choose to proceed to explore the discrepancy as the next best step. So again, giving them choice is why I have Netflix, because there's a lot of them, but more so maybe the picture here on the left is the idea of connecting their values and their goals together. Let's work together. Let's focus on it. Let's talk about the discrepancy between where you are and where you want to be. And then evoking. The third principle, MI, centers on uncovering the client's own reasons for change, encouraging the client to explore their autonomous why behind a behavior change, especially with an orientation towards the future, can create the energy needed for a shift. There's a famous quote that I think it's by Rumi is like, what you seek is seeking you. So here's another sort of example broken out by Wendy Well and Coach Carl. It kind of builds upon what we were talking about earlier with the quitting smoking. Wendy Well says, quitting smoking is actually pretty important to me. It's just so hard to quit. And frankly, I can't stand being told how to do it by non-smokers. Coach Carl, it is frustrating when you feel you haven't discovered yet how best to quit. Let's look at what is under your control here. What about quitting is important to you? So giving it back to them, what is important to you? Well, it would get my employer to stop nagging me. That sounds like a good outcome. I'm curious what other outcomes that matter even more. What else do you see that would be an immediate benefit? I'd probably lose this nagging cough that keeps me from getting a good night's sleep. And what else? My coworkers wouldn't look at me like I have the plague. It sounds like that is hurtful for you. What do you wish was happening? Wendy Well, I feel a bit like an outcast around them. I miss out on some conversations and fun when I'm taking smoke breaks during lunch, for example. Coach, you really want to feel like you aren't missing out on any of the opportunities to connect with them. You want to feel included. Wendy Well, yes, that's it. Coach Carl, beyond the workplace, which is just one aspect of your life, what would it mean to you to be free of smoking? So you can see the coach does a great job of not just coming in with all of their health and wellness knowledge to say, well, we know that if you quit smoking, it has benefits on, upper respiratory health, and all these and social and like all these other things. But more so eliciting from the client, like what would this mean to you? Like what would it look like if you're to stop this? What would be some of those benefits, or why is it so important to you? And going through them, and more so reflecting back. rather than, again, hitting them with sort of the psychoeducational knowledge that we sometimes are prone to do and trained to do sometimes in our respective fields. So the idea of evoking from the client and pulling from within their own reasons and motivations. And from there, it's the planning. So this is the action step. These are things like SMART goals. These are ways that we can uh, involve having a collaborative process and create a plan that supports their self-efficacy. I have here on the side sort of determinations of human behavior from self-efficacy. What are the cognitive factors or the behavioral factors, the environmental factors? So we're making sure that we're feeding each of those buckets in our plan to make sure that we are going to create the most sustainable behavior change plan possible. Compared to maybe just focusing on one or the other. So those are our four sort of stages or processes of motivational interviewing. The key differentiator being on that evoking and making sure that we can give time and energy to pulling from within, because another core belief of the coaching and MI field is that the answer usually resides within the person. Our job as helpers is to facilitate it and to allow and keep them accountable towards the things that they know and want in their lives. But any questions here before I move on to some of the specific strategies? We've talked about some, as well as the questions at each stage.
I'm not seeing any questions, but I did want to ask, did you guys make this chart or where did that come from? Because I haven't seen it like played out that way.
Which chart? This one here on the right?
Yeah.
No, I don't know the exact source I got this from, but this would be from self-efficacy theory.
Okay.
So that would be the place to start. Because that's what a lot of I think changes is to build not only personal autonomy, but the feelings of efficacy to rise for whatever they're working on. So it's this focus on those three sort of areas.
Well, I just think it's interesting too when you think about those cognitive factors. I mean, usually those are the short-term goals that you want to change anyway. So when you just see it,
Hmm.
laid out in a very simple way, it makes it easy, at least for the client to understand too.
For sure. All right, I'm gonna move along and get a little less theoretical, a little more practical, and talk about this. I'm going to uh, get a little theoretical quick. I was looking at what my slides are ahead. There's two or three, and then we're going to jump into some of the like tangible things that I'll leave with you with. But I've talked about this a little bit already. My slides will move forward. And I'll share like my own personal story, my own personal time when especially when I first started out, and I still feel this every day. Probably even happened this week when I was teaching class. But when I think about helping, I got into this field because I wanted to support and help others. I had plenty of people do that for me, and I wanted to do that for others. And there's a variety of different helping styles, all have their own place and their own benefits. But for what I think we're specifically talking about here as a community, and where I think actually most students, maybe even faculty and staff are at, motivational interviewing is actually probably the best or better strategy to employ. Not to say that these don't have their place, but for what we're often talking about, it can often get in the way of our desire to help. So I think the one of the first helping styles is the idea of directing. This is where we're deciding for, we determine, we lead, we manage, we prescribe, we take charge, or we tell. And I will say that the time and place for this is when we don't know what we don't know. And this is where I think we do a lot of good programming on campuses for like, how do we have transfer of psychoeducational knowledge? How do we do workshops? How do we do small group meetings where we're informing people around what a standard drink size is, or other health and wellness topics that I've had experience with of like safe sex practices, sleep hygiene, like all these things that are like transfer of knowledge. That's where I think when you don't know what you don't know and you kind of create these information sharing spaces are critical and important. There's sometimes a knowledge gap that we do have. But as we said, a lot of times we have the knowledge, we just can't put it into action. Um, and when we take a directive style with people who maybe already have the knowledge, it's sort of that, I put my hands up again. If we have reasons for change and reasons against change, if we take up the reasons to change and we tell people, we manage, we prescribe, it takes that away and it only leaves them with one voice in their head or one thing to sort of share with you, which is the reasons not to change. It's the sustained talk. So I know I'm being directive in a situation where maybe I need to evaluate my approach when I hear people say, yeah, but. Because what they're saying is, yeah, but I have all these other reasons to not change or to keep the behavior that I have for myself. So when I hear that, maybe a directive style is maybe not the most effective, or I'm not using the style that's most effective for what they need. When I hear that, though, sometimes I switch to the complete other side of the spectrum and take more of a following approach. This is where we attend, we're responsive, we go along with, we observe, we understand, we value. Again, all good words, all good things. I think this is a strategy that is really effective when you're working with people who have all the motivation and all the knowledge, and what they really need is an accountability buddy and or like a cheerleader, right? Like you got this. I'm gonna like just support you along the way. Like let's check in, but you got this. Um, when our people that we're talking about in the AOD space, a lot of times they're trying to make this hard change about smoking or cutting their alcohol use or whatever it may be. Again, they're probably more in this ambivalent in between stage. So the following may not be helpful because what happens here is like if I was directed, I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't drink because da 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 da. They're like, yeah, but, and then I'm like, oh crap, I'm being directed. I need to be more, a different style. I might follow, and they say like, for Wendy Wells' instance, smoking just like it's just a stress reliever for me, and it's work is crazy, life is crazy, I have finals, whatever. Be like, oh, like taking care of yourself is good and like stress management is good. Like that totally makes sense. And then the person says, well, yeah, but I have this nagging cough and I kind of get weird looks from my colleagues or from people on my floor, or yeah, I feel like I'm breaking the rules if I'm on a tobacco-free campus or whatever it may be. Then I'll be like, oh, like, yeah, like, maybe we should change. Like, let's talk about that. Yeah, but actually smoking is a social thing for me, and I actually have some friends that I do this with. So I just follow the client back and forth, and I'm sort of like just ping-ponging back and forth with them in this following approach, which means that if the client is feeling stuck, we just get stuck with them. So with most things, there's sort of a middle ground. Again, both approaches can and have their places, but for what I think most students and what we're talking about specifically here in a motivational interviewing approach, we want to find the middle ground of this guiding, where we accompany, we assist, we collaborate, we elicit, we're pulling from within, we encourage, we inspire, we motivate, and we offer some support. So that's the true spirit of all this stuff that we've been talking about thus far. And now what we're going to get into is like some specific strategies and questions and things that we can do at each of these stages and just in general. Whenever I work with someone, whether it be in my own coaching practice, teaching, when I was with my time on campus with students, I would often talk about like how what the way I want to show up in this is like I figure that we're like getting in a boat together and we're gonna go in like we're gonna row together and go in the direction that you want. Ultimately, you're driving the ship, but like we're here together. I'm here to support you. To play off that sort of example or analogy, some of the key strategies in motivational interviewing are things you do every single day. It's just giving it a fancy name and being strategic about how we use them. So it's ORS. So it's asking good, powerful, open-ended questions. So not the yes, no's, but things that are that pure pique curiosity, that are generative in nature in terms of the relationship, but these open-ended questions. Affirmations and reflections, which we saw, I think, really well identified in some of those coaching case studies that we talked about or saw with Lindy Well and Coach Carl, and then summary statements that move the conversations forward. So those are all sort of I think like the highest level, and these are things you do every single day. You communicate with people every single day. It's more being strategic about how you use these skill sets, or each letter of the ORS principles here to facilitate change as best needed. Um, this slide here I have as a sort of summary of the strategies to use at each stage. So we talked about pre-contemplation all the way to relapse. I have a high level. I'm assuming these will be shared. I can share these slides with you as well. But I did want to, and I think if I switch over to this, are you now seeing a Word document and not my PowerPoint? I think I
Yep,
shared.
your
Cool.
video will be.
So this is in way more depth. And um, the logo here is just I have a coaching company, that's what it is. But like I've adapted some work here, and this was adapted from the AOD space, so I could even probably find or get to the one that's more true to like where the roots of MI was in terms of working with individuals in the AOD space. But it talks about what is the stage, what are the needs, and then what are the strategies for each. So it goes into way more depth for each of them, which you can kind of see and scroll through here. Yeah, it has kind of the adapted from here at the bottom if you want to take a look at those. Um, but what I like about this, and I won't go into too much detail because like I don't want to read at you, but like here's the thing, here's a tool that you can leave with. But like the approaches and the strategies that are outlined for each of them here. Um, and specifically, like what are the needs that we need to meet as a helper or as a peer educator or whatever. So these are things that you could use for yourself, you could use for those that you are working with. The other is I'm just going to bounce over to here instead of going to slides and then back to this tab. Are questions to ask at each stage of change. So these are things you can have in your back pocket if you are working with someone, whether or not you are sort of in your head hearing the like I won't or I can't or the I will, those like what stage they're in, if you're thinking about that and kind of seeing where they are in that change process. Or again, you can ask people, here's how change usually happens and da 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 da. What stage do you feel like maybe you're in? From there, if you have either like your own or maybe a self-assessment, if you will, from the people and students you're working with, you can have some of these questions to sort of use. So the pre-contemplation, again, this like, yeah, I'm not ready yet. The scale is tipped in one direction. Um, Probably my favorite question from this one that I've used and seen from other people is, what would happen for you to know that a change is needed? It may not be now, but like, what would need to happen for you to then start contemplating or to start thinking about change? It's a great question that validates that they're not ready yet, but plants the seed for what might come. Contemplation, again, thinking about it, more of an even split. Um, why do you want change at this time? What are the reasons for not changing? So giving voice to both. A variety of other questions here for you, but like getting, again, the action step here is helping the person tip that balance in favor of change. So asking them about reasons for, reasons against, what would that look like? What might help you with that aspect, or what might help you get towards that goal? As people are prepping, so the gym bag or they're cutting out, maybe they take a different route or planning a different route to work so they don't pass that liquor store or that grocery store that they normally go to get whatever it may be. Um, what are the steps in plan that you've made? Do you have a plan to help you make this change? If so, what does it look like? How will you know you've been successful in making this change is probably the one I like most. So kind of gearing up for what does that look like? What are the success metrics? Action, what steps are you working on now? How are you doing with this stage? What are you learning at this stage? All those types of questions. Maintenance, when the change is becoming more of a habit. What are you doing to keep the change going? What helps you be successful in managing this change? Again, super heavy on the change language. You can adapt and edit these as much as you need, but getting at the spirit and essence of like meeting people where they are and giving you at least some examples if you don't have some already. If you do have some questions you love and are like to use with people, I would love for you to drop them in the chat. I like to hear and get inspired from others and add and sort of make this an iterative document. And then relapse is the last. So these two documents I will leave you with. I don't want to go into too much depth on them now, just because I think I've summarized a lot of it and just be more so as like a tool and toolkit for you as we leave together today. So that's that and that. Um, I've also here, these will be again provided for you, but outline some of the core skill sets that might be um, warranted to use, not only those questions, but specific skills. Um, the ORS is throughout because that's like the foundation, but there's some other like roll with resistance, and then decisional balance, EPE, rulers and scaling questions. I'm going to talk about those just briefly, but those are kind of things that I think can help in each of these four sort of processes. Decisional balance for those who maybe are not familiar or maybe as a review is a really effective tool that you can either just use in your lines of questioning and working with people, or it could be a specific worksheet that you're doing, but it's kind of getting at the scales, like tipping it, but it's giving voice to both. Again, we don't often do that, but it follows the particular process of first talking about the status quo. So what are the benefits of staying the same? Wendy, well, what are the benefits of continuing your smoking? It's social. It's a stress reliever, all the things that were sort of shared, but listing out as many of those things, like what are the pros to staying the same? But then getting to what are your concerns about staying the same? I have this gnarly cough. I blah, 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 whatever the reasons are that the person has, but listing those out. The third is then going to the new behavior. What are your concerns about the new behavior if you were to stop smoking or to cut back on your alcohol? Well, my friend group is there, or I'm not sure how I would cope with stress otherwise, like whatever it may be. And then the fourth is ending on, and you want to have this sort of recency bias of what are the benefits of making change. So you start with the status quo first, and you go positive, negative, and then you go to new behavior and you go negative, positive. So it's this sort of process that you can use with people to guide them through, gives voice to both, with the intention of hopefully getting the scales to tip in favor of change. And again, if someone's pre-contemplated, this is probably not the technique to use, which is why I don't have it here. But as you're working through um, the later stages of change, it might be more effective. So that's an effective tool. And then the last one, rulers and scaling questions. Just like it sounds, on a scale of 1 to 10, how willing are you to make this change? How confident are you to make this change? How ready are you to make this change? Um, Sort of the best practice here is if, how willing are you to change your smoking? Or how ready? If they say a 6, the best practice here is to first go backwards. So, oh, 6, that's great. You're sort of middle high. That's great. I'm curious why you didn't say a 4. Like, what is that? And what you're doing there is you're eliciting from them the reasons for change. It's sort of boosting up their self-efficacy. Well, like, oh, well, I've done it before. I've quit for 3 months and like I saw a lot of benefits, so I know I can do it. And you start to hear them talk and bring out the change talk rather than the sustain talk. And then the next strategy after going backwards is then, well, how do I get you to a 7 or an 8? So those are strategies and techniques that you can also use and things that I wanted to share as well. But in conclusion, as with most things, whether it's MA or otherwise, meet people where they are. People are complex, change is complex, meeting people where they are and not giving we want to give as personalized and tailored recommendations and care and support as we can. So meet people where they are. In most situations, people do not want to be told what they do. They're looking for an opportunity for autonomy and growth. This idea of they don't resist change, they resist being changed. The answer often resides within the other person. Our job is to be facilitators and accountability buddies for them. And sustainable change happens when that intrinsic motivation is high. So I hope with that sort of summary, but also sort of theoretical and practice of MI, you'll hopefully leave with something for you in your respective roles. But with our remaining time here, I just wanted to open it up for any questions or concerns.
I was going to say, Kristen or Beth, if either of you had questions, please feel free to unmute. But thank you, James, for that wealth of information. And for me, it was just a very eye-opening, straightforward application, which I don't have a background of training with MI, so it was just really great to hear it straightforward. I've been familiar with stages of change, but just to see that play out. And I'm excited, if you're okay with it, to share that with people, because I did have some individuals message. They were saying, hey, I had to hop off early. I've got meetings going on,
Yep,
but you could share
it's that
everything.
time of year.
Yep.
It's that time of year, and then college campuses right now are going through a lot. So
Yep.
totally understand. Feel free to share those.
Okay.
I'll just follow up with you with the email with these slides and the
Awesome.
two resources, and you can
Okay.
send those to whoever you need. And for those of you who like these, I'll be doing another one on some research I've done with some national associations about like how do we construct environments of well-being that support faculty, staff, and students. So hope to see anyone who's interested in that here in a couple weeks.
Okay. Yeah, we'll keep you posted. Oh, I forgot about that. Yep. All right. Well, I'll get those posted and share them. And thank you again for your time.
Yep. See y'all later.